A toast is made. Minutes later, the guest is dead. Coincidence or murder? Welcome to Clue Hunt. I am your host, Thornwick. This mystery's for all of you. Drop a comment and share where you're watching from. Hearing from you always brings this channel to life. Let's begin. I've watched Nero Wolfe tolerate a great many things in his temple of fine food and finer indolence. An opera critic with halitosis, a wine merchant with a nervous tic, and even that time a suspect tried to fake a seizure in the orchid room and nearly got drenched by Fritz with a watering can. But one thing Wolfe does not abide is disruption during dinner, especially not from a man who, midway through Fritz's squab in rosemary glaze, dropped his fork with the weight of guilt and went down head first into his plate, dead before I could finish chewing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The afternoon had started quietly enough. Wolfe had just completed his post-lunch rituals, 3 minutes of grumbling about the current state of American literature, followed by the ascent to the orchid rooms where he spent his sacred 2 to 4 ritual among his floral companions. I was in the office pretending to alphabetize expense reports and actually reading a pulp western hidden inside the folder when the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. Clean-cut, early 50s, navy overcoat, face like he owned more law degrees. And then, friends, I opened the door. "Yes? I'm Howard Tuckman. Mr. Wolfe is expecting me," he said, as if I'd forgotten to roll out a red carpet. That caught my ear. Wolfe hadn't mentioned anyone. "Sure, come in." I stepped aside. If he is expecting you, it's news to me. But then again, he doesn't always share his social calendar with the help. He didn't blink. Lawyer. Definitely. I led him through the hallway and into the office, where Wolfe had just come down like a reluctant god descending Olympus. Wolfe settled into the red leather throne behind his desk and gave the man a half-lidded glance. "Tuckman," he said, "you've arrived early. I dislike that." "I dislike dead clients," Tuckman shot back coolly. "And I think I'm about to have one." That pried Wolfe's eyelids open a few millimeters more. Tuckman sat down, brushed a bit of lint from his lapel like he was filing an objection, and looked at both of us like he was already regretting his decision. "I'm a partner at Keller and Hart," he began. "One of our senior clients, Mr. Roderick Rowan, is dining here tonight. He's wealthy, influential, and paranoid. You're the only man he'll dine with at ease." Wolfe's eyebrow made a brief climb. "Nonsense." Tuckman nodded like he expected that. "Fine, he says he trusts your palate and your sense of confidentiality, same difference." I didn't say anything. I was waiting for the catch. Tuckman didn't disappoint. He thinks someone is trying to poison him. He's refused to eat anything not prepared in your kitchen. He'll only dine here with you. Wolfe snorted. "Phooey. I am not a sanctuary for hysterics, but you are a gourmand, and a man who prizes reputation. If he dies somewhere else, it's a tragedy. If he dies here, it's a headline." That got Wolfe to pause. Tuckman leaned forward. "Consider it a courtesy, Mr. Wolfe. If nothing happens, you've wasted an evening. If something does happen—" His eyes slid to me. "Then you'll want Mr. Goodwin's instincts on hand." Wolfe closed his eyes. "What is the hour?" 7:30. Tonight. You will join him?" "No," Tuckman said quickly. "He insisted it be just you, him, and your man, and your chef. He trusts no one else." There was a long silence. Wolfe pressed his fingers together. "Mr. Goodwin," he said without opening his eyes, "make the necessary arrangements." "Yes, sir," I said. "Shall I put the poison on the side?" Tuckman didn't smile. We had no idea, of course, that Roderick Rowan wouldn't survive the salad course, or that his death would drag in 5 suspects, 3 secrets, and 1 memory Wolfe had long tried to forget. But then again, dinner at Wolfe's was never just dinner. It was just after 7 when the doorbell rang again, this time with the deliberate confidence of a man used to being answered. I opened it to find Roderick Rowan standing there like a living bronze bust, all square chin and cold eyes, wrapped in a camel hair coat that had probably cost more than my yearly dry cleaning bills. He looked me over with a swift scan that filed me under staff and moved on. "I assume Mr. Wolfe is expecting me," he said, stepping across the threshold before I could answer. His voice had the worn edge of privilege, like someone who'd spent a lifetime giving instructions and being obeyed, no matter how irrational. "He is," I said, closing the door behind him, "though whether he's looking forward to it is another story." I took his coat, hung it, and led him down the hall toward the office. He moved slowly but with authority, the kind of walk that made you think he either owned the building or was trying to decide whether it was worth buying. Wolfe was already seated in his chair, one arm resting on the armrest, the other hand dangling, a glass of yellow chartreuse like it was part of a ritual. He didn't rise. Wolfe never rises. Rowan gave him a look like he'd just spotted something mildly offensive on a museum wall. "Nero Wolfe," he said, "you don't look like a man who likes to be involved in other people's problems." "I do not," Wolfe replied. "I find them tedious, overwrought, and usually the result of poor judgment. And yet," Rowan said, sliding into the red chair opposite him, "you agreed to host this dinner." "I agreed to protect my chef from an uninvited lawsuit," Wolfe said. "Mr. Tuckman's implication was that if you perished mid-forkful, your estate might seek recourse. I do not suffer threats, implied or otherwise." Rowan gave a slow, dry smile. "So you agreed to feed me to protect yourself?" Wolfe sipped his chartreuse. "Precisely." From the corner of the room, I watched Rowan take in the space. Walls of books, the globe, the old-school comfort of polished mahogany and restrained luxury. He seemed to relax by degrees, as though the structure of the room was something he could trust. That, I thought, was going to make things worse. Fritz appeared at the door. "Dinner is served." We moved to the dining room. Wolfe's table, round and set for four, bore the silent elegance Fritz favoured. Silver utensils gleaming, wine already decanted, candlelight muted enough to flatter everyone. Rowan took his seat and stared at the plate in front of him like it might contain dynamite. Fritz stood behind him, impassive. I sat across from Rowan and tried to act like I was enjoying myself. Wolfe, of course, was already halfway into his appetizer. Fritz had outdone himself. First course, an arugula and endive salad with caramelized walnuts, a whisper of blue cheese, and a citrus vinaigrette that tasted like it had been whispered. "Two by angels." Rowan picked at it like a man examining evidence. "This was prepared under your supervision?" he asked Wolfe. "It was prepared by my chef, Mr. Brenner. Fritz has served me faithfully for over 30 years. If you suspect him, leave now." Rowan's jaw tightened, but he took a cautious bite. I followed suit, and Wolfe continued without looking up. 10 minutes in, the conversation stalled. Wolfe wasn't the type to force dinner chat, and Rowan seemed content to eat in silence, as though each bite might be his last and he didn't want to die mid-sentence. He didn't touch his wine. Fritz brought the second course, squab in rosemary glaze, roasted carrots in butter, and a side of wild rice, with toasted pine nuts. I could have kissed him. Rowan took 2 bites of squab, chewed, paused, and then it happened. He set down his fork. His eyes met Wolfe's, and something flickered in them. Regret, recognition, or just indigestion. Either way, he never said a word. His fingers twitched once. Then he slumped forward, head first, into the rice. There was a moment of pure stillness. Fritz, steady as a metronome, stepped forward and checked for a pulse. He looked up and shook his head. Wolfe didn't rise. He didn't speak. He merely turned to me with eyes like twin drills. "Archie." "Yeah," I said. "Call it in?" He nodded once. "And Mr. Tuckman." I stood and reached for the phone. Part of me wanted to check Rowan's pockets, but I'd been around Wolfe long enough to know that the moment you move something before the police arrive, you've just volunteered for suspicion. I dialed Kramer. He answered on the second ring. "What?" "Inspector," I said. "You might want to bring a couple of your boys over. We've got a dinner guest who's gone and died in his plate. Where are you? Wolfe's. It was during dinner, a Mr. Roderick Rowan. There was a pause. Cause? No signs yet. He just dropped. We haven't touched the body. I'm on my way. I hung up and turned back. Wolfe had still not moved. He was staring at the body with that stillness of his, the kind that made you realize his mind had already begun rearranging the room for logic. 10 minutes later, Kramer arrived with his usual smell of frustration and cigar smoke. He barreled in like a man with a vendetta against gravity, took one look at Rowan's body and swore under his breath. Jesus, Wolfe, can't you ever have a normal meal? I assure you, Wolfe said, the meal was superlative. The company was not. Kramer grunted. Anyone else here? Just us, I said. Rowan refused to bring anyone. Said he trusted no one but Wolfe, me, and the cook. Did he say why? He thought someone was trying to poison him. We were the safe option. Kramer stepped around the body like it might explode. You serve him anything special? Same food we ate, I said. Nothing he got that Wolfe didn't. Kramer looked to Wolfe. You ate the same squab? Wolfe inclined his head. With relish. So unless he had a rare allergy to pine nuts, or the world's slowest-acting paranoia, I said. Kramer muttered and signaled to his men to start photographing. We'll need talk screens. Interviews. I'm going to want to talk to that lawyer. Tuckman, Wolfe said. He was here earlier. He'll return. Kramer's eyes flicked to Wolfe. You think this was murder? I think, Wolfe said, that Mr. Rowan came here with the expectation of danger. And now he is dead. Kramer scowled. That's not an answer. It's not a question, Wolfe replied. Fritz came in with coffee, not for the dead, but for the living. I took mine black. Wolfe declined. Kramer sat with his, but didn't sip. What did he do? Kramer asked, eyes still on the body. He was a venture capitalist, I said. Old money, connected, cautious and careful. And apparently just careful enough to die in exactly the one place he thought was safe. Kramer ran a hand through his hair. Which means the killer either knew he'd be here or got lucky. Wolfe closed his eyes. No, Inspector, he said. Luck has nothing to do with this. Outside, the sirens had quieted. Inside, the brownstone felt different. Not because a man had died, men die in all sorts of stupid ways, but because Wolfe, for all his silence, looked, if only for a moment, intrigued. That was worse than concern. Wolfe never got intrigued, without expecting someone else to end up unhappy. And usually that someone wasn't me, usually. The next morning brought the kind of stillness to the brownstone that only follows a storm, or in our case a dinner guest who'd used the entree, as a launching pad to eternity. Wolfe had gone up to the plant rooms at 9 sharp, pretending that orchids were more important than murder. I knew better. That man never retreated unless his brain was already busy forming a chessboard out of motives and facial tics. As for me, I was dealing with the aftermath, which included an early call from Saul Panzer, his usual smooth delivery replaced by something almost resembling curiosity. You sure he wasn't choking? Positive, I said. Wolfe would have spotted it, so would Fritz. It wasn't panic, it was stillness, like someone flipped the switch inside him. Saul made a sound like he didn't like that idea, which made 2 of us. What's next? You're next. I need a full workup on Roderick Rowan, business interests, enemies, recent habits. Start with his office, Keller and Hart. You want the quiet kind or the noisy kind? Quiet, for now, just get a read. He hung up without saying goodbye. That's how you know Saul's interested. He saves his manners for people who can't. Pay him. By the time Wolfe lumbered down from the plant rooms, Inspector Kramer had already called 3 times. Wolfe ignored all of them. He finally settled behind his desk and looked at me over the rim of his Montenegrin scowl. Report. I gave him the morning summary. Rowan's death had made the late edition of the Gazette, sandwiched between a subway strike and a mayoral scandal. No mention of poison yet, just sudden collapse during private dinner. The paper had called it a tragedy of confidence. Wolfe grunted at that. Has Tuckman been in touch? Not yet. He will, Wolfe said. He was right. At 10:43 the doorbell rang. Tuckman this time looked less like a lawyer and more like a man who hadn't slept in a well-furnished panic. His tie was slightly crooked. His shoes, still polished, carried the weight of having walked back and forth across too many law firm rugs. I showed him in. You said he was safe, he told Wolfe as soon as he sat. I said the food was safe, Wolfe replied. The man. So was another matter entirely. Tuckman didn't rise to the bait. Kramer's crawling around the firm. He's already questioned Rowan's assistant and flagged 2 of our partners for follow-up. He will find nothing. Oh? How can you be so sure? Wolfe reached for a bottle of small-batch cordial Fritz had brought in from Vermont. He poured exactly 2 fingers into a glass. Because whoever killed Mr. Rowan did so with the expectation that he would eat here, at this table. The planning required for that suggests not just foresight, but access. Tuckman looked at me. You think it was someone inside? I shrugged. We'll know more once the talk screen comes back. Right now it's a short list. You, Wolfe. Me, Fritz. Ridiculous. That's the trouble with exclusivity, I said. It cuts down on witnesses. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Tell me about Mr. Rowan's recent affairs. Tuckman hesitated. He had many investments, real estate, biotech, high-end hospitality. He was helping fund a new chain of boutique hotels for tech executives. Hotels, Wolfe muttered. Pfui. Was he embroiled in any litigation? Several. Minor civil suits. Nothing extraordinary. What about personal entanglements, enemies with faces, not contracts? Tuckman winced. He was selective, widowed, no children, but there were people who resented him. He could be abrasive. Names, Wolfe said, preferably those with recent proximity. Tuckman reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Neat, labeled. The lawyer's equivalent of rolling over and showing your belly. Rowan. Met regularly with 5 individuals over the last 3 months, he said. One of them, Victor Sano, was a former protégé turned competitor. Another, Alicia Rowan, his niece, was pushing for early inheritance, claiming financial hardship. There's also Tobias Key, a former business partner recently cut out of a hotel deal. And finally, Dr. Lynn Calder, a private nutritionist. Rowan consulted after his health scare 6 weeks ago. She designed his meal regimen. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A nutritionist? Yes. Rowan had begun suspecting food sensitivities. He was obsessing over purity and trace ingredients. Dr. Calder created a strict protocol, which he disregarded to dine here. Tuckman exhaled. He said this place was controlled. His word. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, begin with Alicia Rowan, the niece. Discover whether financial hardship includes criminal resourcefulness. On it. And Saul? Already working the corporate angle. Wolfe nodded, then turned his attention. To Tuckman, you may leave that list with Mr. Goodwin, and kindly inform Inspector Kramer that I will receive him at 6. Not before. Tuckman left with the grace of a man who just watched his meal ticket fall into a wood chipper. I gave him 10 seconds, then slipped on my coat and hat. I started with Alicia Rowan. Her address was in Gramercy, east of the park, in a building that screamed, old family money losing interest in the market. She opened the door herself, a woman in her 30s with inherited cheekbones, and the kind of eyes that made you wonder if she was about to cry or ask for another glass of scotch. Miss Rowan, I asked. Yes? Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. Her eyes flashed. Is this about Uncle Roderick? It is. She stepped aside and let me in. The apartment smelled like lavender and dust. Nothing lived here but memories and central air. "Sit if you like," she said, "but I won't pretend I'm surprised." "Oh?" She laughed once dryly. He thought he was immortal. He assumed the world would bend because he was standing in it. You ever watch a man believe he's smarter than fate? "Can't say I haven't," I said, thinking of Wolfe. She lit a cigarette with practiced fingers. "I told him once, the people you alienate are the ones who learn patience. That's when they get dangerous, and is that what you were? Alienated?" "No." She exhaled, just disappointed. "Your lawyer mentioned financial hardship. That's one way of putting it. He had control of the trust. He liked reminding me. Enough to poison him." She turned and met my eyes. "If I'd wanted him dead, I'd have picked a day where the suspect list was longer than a dinner. Table." I didn't press. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she seemed relieved. As I walked out, I made a mental note. Alicia had motive, resentment, pressure, money, but no access. She hadn't seen him in weeks. She'd texted. That was all. I called Wolfe from a payphone. "She's bitter," I said. "But she didn't do it, not unless she's been slipping arsenic through the mail." "Next," Wolfe said, "I'll check Key and see if Dr. Calder believes in slow poison." When I got back to the brownstone at 5, the house was quiet. Fritz was preparing dinner. Wolfe was already in the office, eyes closed, fingers poised like a man composing his next move on a board only he could see. I sat, poured myself a drink and waited. At precisely 6, the doorbell rang. Kramer, right on time, stepped inside with his usual bulldog glare and a folder thick with results. He didn't sit. "It was aconitine," he said. "Monkshood, tasteless, fast-acting, not something you stumble across unless you're looking." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Then," he said, "we are no longer speculating." Kramer crossed his arms. "You still think the killer knew he'd eat here?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and now I'm certain. The killer didn't just know the meal, he influenced it." I sat forward. "You think it was Dr. Calder?" Wolfe nodded. "Tomorrow you will visit her." He looked at me then, not just with calculation, but with something close to anticipation. "This was not a crime of passion," he said. "This was a performance, and we were the audience." And suddenly, I didn't feel like a detective anymore. Felt like a prop. The next morning, I found myself driving through midtown traffic with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a stomach full of suspicion. Wolfe had given me a name and an address. Dr. Lynn Calder, Ph.D. in nutritional biochemistry, currently operating out of a minimalist office suite on the 15th floor of a wellness center that offered everything from acupuncture to juice cleanses. Wasn't optimistic. Nutritionists don't usually carry out elaborate murder plots involving monkshood, but this one had designed Rowan's food protocol and had his complete trust. In Wolfe's book, that gave her both motive and means. I walked into the waiting area and was hit by a wave of eucalyptus and curated calm. The receptionist wore beige like it was a religion and spoke in the tone of someone afraid to disturb. "A bowl of decorative stones. Do you have an appointment?" "Nope," I said, flashing my credentials, "but I'm charming and fast on my feet." She blinked at me but buzzed me through. Dr. Calder's door was ajar. I knocked once and stepped in. Lynn Calder was somewhere in her early 40s, rail-thin but not fragile. Her hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, and she wore glasses with frames sharp enough to cut steak. She didn't rise when I entered. Instead, she set down the tablet she'd been reading and regarded me with the calm disapproval of someone about to assign homework. "You're from the police?" "Private sector," I said. "I work for Nero Wolfe." Her eyebrow twitched. "The gourmet detective?" "Among other things. I'd like to talk to you about Roderick Rowan." She gestured to the chair across from her. "You'll want to know what he ate. That, and who might have wanted him dead." She gave me a long, cool look. "I can't imagine why someone would poison him. He was demanding." but not dangerous. I was under the impression he was extremely cautious. About his food. He was, that's why he hired me. You designed all his meals? Yes, down to the microgram. He had early signs of cardiovascular strain and insisted on controlling every variable. I gave him a plan. He followed it obsessively, at least until recently. Recently? She crossed her legs. He became erratic, impulsive. He stopped, checking in. I sent him an updated detox schedule and he never replied. Did he mention he'd be eating dinner at Wolfe's? Her eyes narrowed. No. That would have horrified him. And yet, he insisted on it. Said it was the only place he felt safe, she snorted. That tracks. He trusted no one except the people who didn't want his trust. I leaned forward. Did you ever prepare food for him yourself? No, she said. I'm not a chef. I'm a scientist. I analyzed his biomarkers, optimized absorption, tailored nutrients to balance his cortisol. If someone tampered with his food, it wasn't from my office. Do you handle any substances that could be toxic in the wrong dosage? Folded her arms. Yes, like every lab in the country. Do you know how many deadly compounds are derived from common botanicals? Monkshood, foxglove, yew, all naturally occurring, all lethal in micrograms. Do you have access to monkshood? She smiled faintly. No. It's heavily regulated. Besides, you don't need to be a scientist to find it. You need a good internet connection and poor morals. I stood. One more thing. When was the last time you saw him? 3 weeks ago. He brought a bottle of wine and told me he'd finally figured out who was trying to control him. I asked who. He said, not you, not anymore. Then he left. Did you believe him? She met my eyes. No one controlled Roderick Rowan, they just thought they did. I left her office more intrigued than when I entered. Calder wasn't shaken. If anything, she was slightly relieved to be rid of him. But she'd slipped up. She hadn't known about the monkshood, but she jumped ahead to it awfully fast. Back, at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office reading La Revue des Vins de France. He looked up when I entered. She's cool, I said. Too cool, didn't flinch, hadn't seen him in 3 weeks, claims he became erratic. She did not know he dined here? No. She said it would have horrified him. Wolfe grunted. Then his decision was not merely practical, it was symbolic. He was making a point. I nodded. She also said he told her he'd figured out who was trying to control him. Wolfe's eyes glittered. Ah, not you, not anymore, I quoted. So who was it? Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he rang for Fritz. Bring the guest list, he said. Fritz appeared moments later with a typed page, Rowan's 5 most frequent contacts, courtesy of Tuckman. Wolfe studied the list like a prophet decoding scripture. Victor Sarno, Alicia Rowan, Tobias Kay, Lynn Calder, and... He paused. Who's Emery Pilcher? I flipped through my notes. Minor investor. Hotel industry. Used to work with. Rowan on something called the Indigo Fold. Wolfe turned to me. Visit him, discover whether he still folds under pressure. That earned him a chuckle. You're developing a sense of humor. He closed his eyes. Heaven forbid. I found Emery Pilcher in a co-working loft in Soho that looked like it had been designed by a Scandinavian with a grudge. Glass walls, potted moss, furniture you couldn't sit on without a back brace. Pilcher was younger than I expected. Early. 40s, trim, and dressed like a tech visionary pretending not to care about money. He greeted me like I was a sales rep for something he'd already bought. You worked with Rowan? I asked. I did, briefly. Tell me about the Indigo Fold. A boutique hotel project, high-end wellness retreats, minimalist design, and immersive culinary experiences. Sounds expensive. It was. Rowan cut me out 6 months ago. Said I lacked conceptual rigor, whatever that means. Were you upset? He shrugged. It's business. Besides, Rowan was impossible. He changed course every 2 weeks. Couldn't commit. You didn't think about getting back at him? Poison, please. I'm petty, not homicidal. What do you know about his relationships? Anyone gunning for him? Pilcher paused. He was feuding with Tobias Key. Something about a non-compete clause. Key was threatening to sue. Who else? He hesitated. He had a quiet falling. Out with Alicia. Said she'd disappointed him and was no longer entitled to the trust. Did she know? Not yet. It was recent. He asked me for a new trustee recommendation. I made a note. Thanks. Back in the car, the pieces started shifting. Alicia, thought to be broke and resentful, might have been recently disinherited. Tobias Quay, an ex-partner with a financial axe to grind, was threatening litigation. Dr. Calder had been dismissed her client in turn, and had access to the right vocabulary, if not the poison. But none of them had known about the dinner, except one. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was pacing. That meant things were aligning. I want them all here, he said. All 5. Tomorrow evening. You will arrange it. All at once, he nodded. We will serve them dinner, under proper supervision. You think one of them will flinch? No, Wolfe said. I expect they'll behave impeccably. He turned, eyes shining now. But I have no intention of watching how they eat. I raised an eyebrow. I will watch how they refuse, he said. And just like that, Wolfe had set the stage for his favorite act. The gathering of suspects, served hot with a side of guilt. The next 24 hours passed with all the serenity of a tiger stalking a glass menagerie. Wolfe didn't leave the brownstone, naturally, but he also didn't retreat to the orchids. He stayed in the office reading dossiers, compiling seating arrangements, and dictating menus to Fritz, as if preparing for a diplomatic banquet rather than a showdown with a possible poisoner. His mind was winding up like a clock with a razor inside. My job was less elegant. I spent the day tracking down our 5 candidates for the guest list of Wolfe's most theatrical maneuver. The dinner, redo Alicia Rowan agreed first. She was cool about it, probably figured it was her chance to play the grieving relative in an upscale setting. Victor Sarno took more convincing. He barked into the phone about lawyers, bad timing, and reputational risk. I told him Wolfe didn't give a damn about his reputation, just whether he could hold a fork. He came around. Tobias Key, on the other hand, was offended we hadn't invited him sooner. I should have been at the original dinner, he snapped. I was closer to Roderick than any of those vultures. If you were closer, I said, you'd have been face down in wild rice. He didn't laugh, but he agreed. Emery Pilcher said yes, like it was a networking event. I assume you'll be serving Pinot Noir with the entree? And a side of scrutiny, I said. Finally, Dr. Lynn Calder. She paused for a beat when I extended the invitation. Dinner, she said. Here, same meal, same setup. She gave a tight little exhale. Of course, I'll be there. By 7 that evening, the brownstone was prepped like a stage. On opening night, Fritz had prepared the same meal to the last detail, but this time he wasn't alone. Wolfe had instructed me to hire a professional food safety monitor, someone neutral, with a badge and a clipboard, and a visible lack of interest in murder. The guy looked like a retired nurse and smelled like antiseptic. Perfect. Wolfe, of course, would not dine. He remained in the office where he would watch the guests after dinner in the ritual he preferred, sitting still while everyone else squirmed. I greeted each guest as they arrived. Alicia Rowan came first, draped in a black dress, with just enough shimmer to suggest mourning with intent. She looked around the front room like someone surveying a museum of old mistakes. Next came Tobias Kay, lean, grey-haired, and visibly annoyed by the company. This feels like a trap, he muttered as I took his coat. If it is, I said, we sprung it yesterday. This is just the encore. Victor Sarno arrived next, bringing a whiff of expensive cologne and the twitchy energy of a man used to hiding lawsuits behind NDAs. He offered Wolfe's name with a stiff nod. Then Pilcher, grinning like a man at a soft launch party, offered me his card even though we both knew I wasn't going to call him. Finally, Dr. Calder, precise, unsmiling, and wearing a steel grey jacket that made her look more like a pathologist than a nutritionist. Wolfe remained in his chair, silent as they filtered in, and were escorted to the dining room. Once they were seated, Fritz emerged, poised and silent. He served the same dishes in the same order as the night Rowan died. No one ate quickly. Each guest touched their food cautiously, casting glances at the others as if trying to detect who looked most like a murderer. The food monitor hovered in the corner, observing with clinical indifference. No one asked questions, no one joked. The only sound was the soft clink of silverware and the occasional throat-clearing of guilt. I watched it all from the side of the room. Dr. Calder didn't touch the squab. Key barely tasted his salad. Alicia pushed her food around like she was trying to decode it. Sarno and Pilcher ate small, calculated bites, like spies tasting enemy cuisine. When dessert was served, fig. Tart with creme fraiche, no one reached for it. I rose and cleared my throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "Mr. Wolfe will see you now." We filed into the office. Wolfe sat behind his desk, his hands folded, his face unreadable. The guests took their seats like defendants before a judge who hadn't decided whether the trial had already ended. Wolfe didn't speak right away. He let the silence grow roots. Then he looked at Alicia. "You did not eat," he said. "I wasn't hungry," she replied. "Nor were you, Dr. Calder." "I avoid nightshades," she said. "You prepared Rowan's diet," Wolfe said, "yet he ate the squab here against your guidance. You told Mr. Goodwin, he said, 'Not you, not any more.'" "Yes." "Who was it then?" Calder hesitated. "He didn't say." Wolfe shifted his gaze to Pilcher. "You had recently discussed a transfer of fiduciary authority with Rowan. He was removing Alicia from his trust." Pilcher blinked. "He asked for a recommendation. I didn't act on it." Wolfe ignored the protest. "And you, Mr. Sarno, Rowan funded your startup. Then he pulled his money. You attempted to repurchase your own shares under a false name. When discovered, he threatened litigation." Sarno's nostrils flared. "I was negotiating. And Tobias K. You had a lawsuit prepared, yes?" Quay sat up. "He cheated me. The indigo fold was my idea." "Indeed. But Roderick Rowan no longer feared legal threats. He feared manipulation. He feared a betrayal that had already happened." Wolfe closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the room felt colder. "Someone here didn't just want him dead. Someone wanted him humiliated, wanted him to flee to me, the one place he believed was secure." No one spoke. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. "The letter." I pulled it from my jacket and unfolded it. It was one of Rowan's private memos, recovered from his apartment via Saul. He had dictated it to a transcription service but never sent it. I read aloud, "To Emery, I do not appreciate your maneuvering with Calder. I trusted her, and you turned her into a proxy. Do not mistake my patience for ignorance. This is the last time R.R. Pilcher turned pale. I don't know what that—" "You convinced Dr. Calder to adjust his supplements," Wolfe said. "You gained her confidence under the guise of health improvements, then introduced your compound, a conitine disguised as a nootropic. You knew Rowan's obsession with optimization. You made poison look like progress." Calder gasped. "You— what?" Wolfe didn't look at her. "When Rowan found out, he confronted you. He planned to expose you, perhaps even prosecute. You knew his habits, his weaknesses. When he insisted on dining here, you saw an opportunity. You knew he would break protocol. You tampered with the sample he brought with him that evening. He trusted it because it came from you." Pilcher stood. You have no proof? No, Wolfe said, leaning back. We will. He looked at me. Archie, when Saul returns, escort Mr. Pilcher to Kramer. Tell him to check the residue on Rowan's personal supplements. The same compound will be found in the squab's seasoning because Rowan brought it. The room rippled with outrage. Pilcher shouted something incoherent. Calder looked gutted. Wolfe merely closed his eyes again. You poisoned not the food, he said, but the man's certainty. That is the cruelest murder of all. The suspects were escorted out in various states of shock, anger, and silence. When the door finally closed, the brownstone was still again. Wolfe exhaled, as if removing an unwanted guest from his very lungs. Fritz entered quietly. Shall I bring dinner? Wolfe nodded. Please, something simple, and untouched by ego. As we sat down for our own meal, finally, Wolfe made his final observation, delivered with the same sharp calm as always. Appetite, Archie, he said, is the truest window to the soul. A man may lie with words, posture, or silence, but never with a fork. I raised my glass. Here's to clean plates and dirty secrets. It was just past midnight when the last echoes of the day's theatrics faded from the brownstone. The guests had gone, some pale, some livid, and one probably plotting his escape route. Inspector Kramer hadn't arrived yet, but Saul Panzer had. He came through the kitchen door like a shadow with a license and handed me a sealed evidence bag. Rowan's vitamin bottle, he said. From his townhouse, one pill compartment was tampered with. The usual supplements were all there except one. Wolfe, who had resumed his rightful place in the office chair after dinner, extended a hand without looking. Saul placed the bag on the desk like it might explode. Wolfe examined it through the plastic, turning it slowly. Smell? Faint, Saul said. Chemical. I didn't open it. I figured you'd want the lab to have a clean start. Wolfe gave a satisfied grunt. And the kitchen vial? Still sealed. Fritz confirmed it. He didn't use it. That was the trick, of course. Pilcher hadn't poisoned the food Wolfe prepared. He'd made sure Rowan would do it himself. When you're obsessed with health, a supplement becomes a trusted companion. And when you believe your chef is infallible, you're willing to sprinkle whatever makes you feel better, especially when it's labeled Digestive Enzyme Booster. Pilcher's own label, of course. Harmless sounding, slightly trendy, utterly fatal in the right dose. Fritz would never have touched a client's personal vial, Wolfe murmured, more to himself than to us. And Pilcher would have known that. Saul looked at me. You want me to stick around? I glanced at the clock. Might as well. Kramer's due any minute, and when he hears Wolfe cracked it with a dinner party, he's going to need a witness to keep him from self-combusting. Saul raised an eyebrow. He won't be mad you solved it. He'll be mad how you solved it. Kramer doesn't like mysteries wrapped in roast squab, I said. He likes confessions with ink on them. At 12:23, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered and brought Kramer into the office with all the enthusiasm of a man announcing a mild house fire. The inspector stomped in, hair askew, coat collar up, a smouldering cigar jammed into the corner of his mouth like a legal threat. Tell me you didn't do it with a dinner party, he said. Wolfe didn't rise. I did. Kramer sighed and dropped into the red armchair like it had betrayed him. Tell me, Wolfe gestured toward me. I gave the rundown. Clean, chronological, no embellishments. Just the facts. Kramer listened with the grim intensity of a man cataloguing sins. When I got to the part about the supplement bottle, he reached for it like it owed him money. That's your murder weapon? Wolfe inclined his head. It was laced with aconitine. Rowan added it himself to his food, Kramer growled. You think Pilcher slipped it in? I do not think, Wolfe said. I deduce. He manipulated Dr. Calder into introducing him to Rowan's regimen. He offered a supplemental enzyme, one which Rowan trusted, believed in, and eventually brought here. Kramer turned the bottle over in his hands. So you're saying Rowan poisoned himself? Under the illusion of control, Wolfe said. Which Pilcher engineered? You're damn sure of this. You will find Pilcher's fingerprints on the label. Not just from handing it over, but from modifying it. The residue will match the chemical compound discovered in Rowan's blood, and Dr. Calder's logs will show a sudden gap, when Rowan stopped logging his doses. After Pilcher convinced him the new protocol didn't need monitoring, Saul gave a low whistle. That's cold. No, Wolfe said. It's calculated. Kramer muttered something under his breath and stood. I'll bring him in. I'll get the lab to match the compounds. If you're wrong, I am not, Wolfe said. Kramer turned at the door. You just can't do things normal, can you? No, Wolfe replied, because I do them correctly. When Kramer was gone, Wolfe closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath through his nose. A rare gesture for him, something that looked suspiciously like fatigue. Saul leaned forward. Why dinner? Wolfe didn't open his eyes. Because it was never about Rowan's death. It was about restoring the logic he disrupted. He gestured vaguely toward the dining room. He died there, not in a street or an alley or some hotel. There at my table. My sanctuary was made a scene of foolish death. I would not let that stand. The stage had to be reset. Saul nodded once, slowly. Then he stood. I'll file the rest with Kramer. After he left, I poured myself a nightcap and walked back into the office. Wolfe hadn't moved. His eyes were still closed. I leaned against the desk. You know I watched every one of them eat tonight. Or not eat. You were right. Of course I was. No, I mean you were right about the refusal. That's what gave it away, wasn't it? Wolfe opened his eyes just barely. Refusal, Archie, is a more intimate confession than indulgence. Pilcher knew the food wasn't poisoned, but he couldn't be sure no one else had tampered with it. He couldn't risk the irony of eating what he himself had corrupted. I swirled the drink in my glass. And Dr. Calder? She didn't eat because she felt complicit, she suspected, subconsciously at least. Rowan had pulled away, but she hadn't questioned why. She may never admit it, but she will never forget it. There was a long silence. Wolfe turned his head slightly as if noticing the stillness of the house. It's over, I said. No, Wolfe replied softly. It's resolved. Not the same thing. That's Wolfe. Even in victory, he doesn't let you pop the champagne. There's always a second layer. A motive under the motive, a shadow under the solution. I headed to bed around 1, leaving him there in the dark office, the outline of his head against the soft gold light from the desk lamp, the city murmuring, outside like it had its own secrets to keep, and maybe it did. But for tonight our corner of the world was quiet, which, around here, counts as a miracle. The next morning dawned grey, with a kind of smothered light that made the city look like it was still deciding whether to bother waking up. The brownstone, by contrast, was already moving, quietly, deliberately, like a beast with a routine. Fritz was humming in the kitchen. Wolfe, predictably, had taken his breakfast in silence and vanished into the orchid rooms by 9. And I, as usual, was left with the aftermath. Phone messages, mail, and one handwritten note from Inspector Kramer, delivered via uniformed grunt, and scrawled in that charming combination of caps and contempt he used whenever Wolfe outmaneuvered him. Gotti. Your lab report, you're right, I hate you. That was the entirety of it. For Kramer, practically a love letter. I pinned it to the office bulletin board next to the unpaid bills and the latest memo from Saul. The lab had confirmed it. The compound found in Rowan's system matched residue in the bottle of enzyme supplements he'd brought with him to dinner. Not only that, it had been cut with a food-safe stabilizer, one not available on the open market, but frequently used in boutique wellness startups. One such startup belonged to none other than Emery Pilcher. His company, Prime Vitalis, marketed clean bioavailable vitality stacks to rich people who liked the idea of science but not the actual homework. They hadn't made a profit in 18 months, but their branding was impeccable. I was halfway through reading a glossy brochure of his product line, complete with airbrushed testimonials, when the phone rang. Archie Goodwin. "Mr. Goodwin, this is Alicia Rowan." The voice had lost its earlier cool edge. Now it sounded shaken, stripped raw. "I heard about Pilcher," she said. "Kramer questioned me again this morning. He'll be thorough. That's how he stays employed." I thought I should thank you, and Mr. Wolfe, no need for that. But since you've called, maybe you can answer something. Why didn't you eat at the reenacted dinner?" A pause. "I didn't trust the food." "That's not what I mean. You knew Wolfe wouldn't risk another death in his house. And you looked pale when you sat down before you saw the plate." She hesitated. "Because I knew Rowan would have brought his own vial of enzymes. He always did. And if someone had gotten to him, that's how they would have done it." "You suspected." "Pilcher. Not until the reading of the will yesterday. He was named as secondary trustee. If anything happened to me, he'd have control of the trust." I sat up straighter. "You hadn't been cut out entirely?" "No. Rowan had threatened to, but he hadn't changed the documents yet. So Pilcher would have needed you out of the way eventually too." "Yes. And he didn't know you weren't dining with Rowan the night he died." She took a shaky breath. "That's right. I didn't need to say more." She understood what that meant, and she was lucky she hadn't eaten that night. After I hung up, I typed out the full chain of connections for Wolfe, who, despite his mental hard drive, demanded clean chronology. He came down around noon, sat at his desk, and read it all with one finger trailing under each line like a schoolteacher checking homework. When he reached the final page, he stopped. "He did not expect Rowan to die so quickly," Wolfe murmured. "He planned to observe the symptoms, then swoop in with a new remedy, become indispensable. Classic arsonist fireman routine," I said. "Start the problem, then get praised for fixing it." "He overstepped," Wolfe said, "because Rowan changed the venue. He ate here." "Without telling Pilcher," I nodded. "That's the part that sealed it, isn't it? Yes, Rowan sought safety, so he died before the performance could play out. Pilcher never got the chance to pose as the savior. Bad timing for him." "Good timing for justice," Wolfe snorted. "Justice is seldom timely. It arrives when it pleases." He pushed the pages aside and looked at me. "What of Calder? She's clean, hurt maybe, humiliated, but not guilty. She turned over all her client files and submitted a formal affidavit. She will never work again." "No," I said, "but she'll live." We were quiet for a while. I could feel the city humming again outside, the horns, the footsteps, the elevators groaning under morning traffic. Inside the brownstone it was different, still, restored. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. "This was not a murder born of rage," he said. "It was born of strategy. A man tried to move through the world like a sculptor, chiseling. A way lives to fit his vision. And when it didn't go his way, he panicked," Wolfe finished. "And now he will rot in a cell surrounded by fools who once thought him brilliant." "That's poetic," I said. "It is accurate." At that moment, Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Wolfe, lunch is ready. Truffled egg salad and the final batch of the squab. Prepared for private enjoyment only, I assure you." Wolfe rose, with a nod almost regal. "Join me, Archie. Don't mind if I do." We ate in silence for a while. The food was excellent, as always. Fritz had a way of making even leftovers feel like a royal indulgence. Wolfe savored each bite, as though cleansing his palate not just of flavor, but of the disorder that had invaded his table. Halfway through his second sandwich, he spoke. "Rowan came to me not because he feared death, but because he feared uncertainty. That is the greater terror, Archie. Not the end itself, but the loss of control. And Pilcher gave it to him." "No," Wolfe said, dabbing his mouth. "I did." I raised a brow. He died in a place he believed was safe, Wolfe continued. That belief was false, but it was his own, and in that I gave him something Pilcher could not, the dignity of self-deception. It was a strange note to end on, but not uncharacteristic. Wolfe had a way of recognizing the bleak comforts people clung to, even as he dissected them with scalpel precision. As I cleared my plate, I looked across the table and asked what I always do at the end of these things. Was it worth it? Wolfe leaned back full now, satisfied in body if not in soul. Yes, he said simply. My home was violated. I have restored it. And dinner? Exquisite. He poured himself a small glass of Madeira and lifted it gently in salute to whom I couldn't say. To order, to orchids. Maybe even to Rowan, the man who died trying to outmaneuver his own paranoia. I raised my coffee in return. To the next guest, I said. May he keep his fork to himself. Wolfe didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. That, he said, is optimism, and I find it appalling. The storm had passed, not the kind that rattles windows and floods gutters, though New York had certainly seen its share of those lately, but the internal kind, the kind that takes over a household, rearranges routines, and stains the wallpaper with suspicion. Wolfe's brownstone had returned to its natural state, controlled, hushed, and running. On rituals older than some countries, Fritz was humming again. The orchids were soaking up their scheduled mist, and even the front door, solid oak and untrusting, seemed to exhale now that no strangers were due to pass its threshold. He, however, hadn't quite settled. Maybe it was because Kramer's final report was still pending, or because Pilcher had refused to confess, even as the lab built a chemical case tight enough to strangle a jury into submission. Or maybe it was just the faint scent of wild rice that still clung to the dining room carpet. The murder had been solved, the suspect identified, the motive exposed, but Wolfe hadn't closed the case file yet, and I knew him too well to think that was laziness. He was waiting for something. That something came on a grey Friday morning in the form of a pale, green envelope slid through the mail slot. Fritz picked it up, sniffed at it like a suspicious soufflé, and handed it to Wolfe after breakfast. Wolfe took one look at the handwriting and grimaced. Alicia Rowan, he muttered. Drama. Not a thank-you note? Unlikely. Gratitude. Here's a dish served only when nothing else remains. He opened it slowly, slid out the card and read silently. Then he handed it to me with a flick of his wrist, like he'd just touched something sticky. I read, Mr. Wolfe, I've decided to leave the city. The trust has been restructured, the estate settled. I no longer wish to be part of the stage my uncle built for himself. You gave him what he wanted most in the end, the illusion of safety. That is a rare gift. I'm not sure I can offer more than acknowledgement. For what it's worth, I'm sorry he died in your home. I doubt he'd have wanted that, but I also doubt he would have changed a thing. ARI whistled low and passed. Beckans poetic, a touch morbid. She'd make a good true crime podcaster. Wolfe made a dismissive noise and tossed the card onto the pile of correspondence he had no intention of ever replying to. She is extraneous now, but useful, I said. Her absence confirms the motive. Pilcher stood to gain if she stayed, and even more if she vanished. She was a lever, Wolfe agreed. And now she's been pulled. There was a knock at the door. Not the buzzer, an actual knock, rare. I got up and opened it to find Saul Panzer, damp from the weather but otherwise composed. I come bearing closure, he said, handing me a folder. Inside was a complete report on Pilcher's financials, phone records, travel receipts, even a digital transcript of an email Pilcher had sent to a business associate the week before Rowan died. Once this deal clears, I'll have the trust vote sewn up. Nothing in the way anymore. I passed it to Wolfe, who read it once and then nodded. There, buttoned up tight, Saul said. He won't wiggle out of this one. Wolfe allowed a rare sound of satisfaction. Thank you, Saul. Saul tipped his hat slightly and vanished into the rain. Wolfe turned to me. Now we're done. Just like that? Yes. No more threads? No more that matter. He looked at the orchid timer, then at Fritz, who was polishing. Silver at a pace that suggested revenge against tarnish. Lunch, Wolfe said. Something light. We've earned a lull. But I wasn't ready to let it go just yet. As we sat in the dining room, I turned the conversation back toward Rowan. He was smart, I said. Paranoid, yes, but smart. You think he suspected Pilcher? I think he suspected everyone. That was his flaw. You don't think he wanted to die? Wolfe looked at me over his water glass. Do not romanticize his death, Archie. Rowan did not engineer it. He merely failed to outmaneuver it. Still, it feels like he set the pieces for this ending. No, Wolfe said firmly. He set the pieces for many endings. He lacked the discipline to finish his own story. Someone else did it for him. That was Wolfe all over. Death for him was never artful, never symbolic. Just facts, motives, and human error, dressed in delusion. Later that afternoon, Kramer called. Wolfe took it from the office speaker, reclining like a Roman emperor taking a report from a battlefield. He's not talking, Kramer said, but he doesn't have to. With the compound match, the emails, and the supplement vial, the DA's building the charge. Good, Wolfe said. I'd prefer he be convicted for what he planned, as well as what he executed. We're pushing for attempted murder on Alicia Rowan too, Kramer added. She wasn't home the night of the first dinner, but Pilcher had no way of knowing that. Precisely, Wolfe said. He meant to silence both, one with poison, one with pressure. There was a pause. You know, Kramer muttered. You're insufferable. Yes, but effective. More than you. Kramer hung up. I turned to Wolfe. Well, that's one more murderer off the street. One less dinner guest, Wolfe corrected. And one more week of peace, Wolfe sighed. Until the next idiot walks in, I smiled. So, same as always. He didn't reply, which was his version of agreement. We both knew the rhythm by now, the disruption, the investigation, the resolution. Then the return to stillness. But something about this case had felt closer to the bone. Wolfe hadn't moved more than 10 feet from his chair, and yet the entire brownstone had been unsettled. Dinner had been defiled, the sacred ritual violated, and Wolfe had restored it. Not with violence, not with threats, but with deduction, timing, and one very carefully orchestrated second meal. That night, I poured myself a glass of rye and sat in the office, listening to the rain nudge the windows. Wolfe was reading the Atlantic Monthly and pretending not to enjoy it. I raised my glass. To the sanctity of the dinner table. He looked up briefly. Sanctity is a human invention, but it's still nice when it holds. He inclined his head. Yes, Archie, he said. Yes, it is. And for a while that was enough. I thought we were finished. We'd exposed Emery Pilcher, laid bare his tangled scheme to control Roderick Rowan's trust by removing both the beneficiary and the benefactor, and handed over enough evidence to send him away long enough to forget what pine nuts even tasted like. Kramer had his man. Wolfe had restored order to his domain, and I'd even taken a Saturday afternoon off without the world catching fire. But the problem with people like Pilcher, men who think life is a game of pieces and pawns, is that they rarely play just one board at a time. It was Sunday morning when the last echo of the case finally landed, unexpected, subtle, and sharp enough to nick even Wolfe's post-case calm. I was in the front room with the Times and a cup of decent coffee, when Fritz appeared holding a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address, just a neat typewritten label that read Nero Wolfe Private. That's the kind of thing that gets your attention in a house that doesn't even let Christmas cards through without scrutiny. Where did this come from? I asked. Fritz looked annoyed. It was tucked under the milk crate on the stoop. That narrowed it down to 3 possibilities: a delivery boy with literary flair, a neighbor with too much time, or someone trying to avoid cameras. I brought it to Wolfe, who was, as expected, in the plant room speaking Latin to a cluster of oncidiums. He emerged slowly, took the envelope, and opened it at the office desk without ceremony. Inside was a single typed page. He read it once, then again. Then he handed it to me. I read it aloud. To Mr. Wolfe. You solved the crime, but you missed the message. Pilcher didn't act alone. The bottle was planted, yes, but not by him. Someone else ensured Rowan would use it. Someone who knew your house. Someone still inside it. An observer, I whistled. Anonymous tip. Wolfe's face had gone completely still. I looked up. You think it's a hoax? No, he said. It is bait. Meaning someone is trying to disrupt. The resolution. Reopen the case, cast doubt. Not to correct the record, but to unnerve me. That's a tall order. Which is why it deserves attention. I nodded. So, we're not done, after all. Wolfe closed his eyes and steepled, his fingers. We are not. We spent the next hour dissecting the letter. Language, neutral, mechanical. The typeface was Courier, possibly from a typewriter, more likely from an old manual text editor. No fingerprints. Fritz had worn gloves. The paper was common white bond, no watermark. So a professional, or a pretender, Wolfe had me retrieve. The guest list again. Someone still inside it, I murmured. The observer implies one of the original suspects. Or, Wolfe said quietly, someone present at the dinner who was not a suspect. That gave me pause. The food inspector? Possibly. Fritz? Unacceptable, Wolfe said instantly. I will not dignify that. I let it pass. But that narrows the field, I said. 6 people in the dining room. Pilcher, Sarno, Key, Calder, Alicia Rowan, and the inspector. One of them delivered this or paid someone too. Possibly, Wolfe said, but consider this. The letter claims someone ensured Rowan would use the bottle. That implies influence, not just access. Could be Calder, she claimed. No knowledge of the vial. Lied. Unlikely. She has no motive to protect Pilcher now. I sat back. Then who? Wolfe opened his eyes. We will find out. We started by inviting the inspector back. Martin Salverson, registered with the city's Health Oversight Bureau, had done the food observation for Wolfe during the reenactment dinner. I remembered him clearly. 60-ish, quiet, carried a clipboard, and wore shoe covers without complaint. He arrived that evening looking puzzled but composed. Wolfe wasted no time. You monitored the second dinner? Yes, sir. Did you interact with any of the guests? Only to introduce myself, no physical contact. Did anyone leave the table? Step away? Use the bathroom? Salverson thought. Alicia Rowan stepped into the hallway once. Said she had a headache. Dr. Calder stood up but didn't leave the room. Wolfe looked at me. Archie. The hallway camera. We still had it. I'd mounted a motion-triggered camera during the second dinner. Wolfe's idea. Not for crime prevention, but for narrative completeness. I retrieved the SD card, popped it into my laptop, and found the timestamp. There, 10 minutes into dinner. Alicia exited the dining room, paused in the hallway, looked toward the coat rack, then bent slightly out of frame. What is she doing? I muttered. Wolfe leaned in. She is adjusting something. We watched the next few seconds. Alicia straightened, glanced back toward the dining room, then reached into her purse, pulled something out, tucked it under the milk crate just outside. The front door, the white envelope. Well, I said, she delivered it herself, Wolfe murmured. Why? Maybe she's trying to stir the pot, create doubt, break the narrative. Then the question becomes, what narrative does she wish to create? We invited Alicia Rowan back the next morning under the pretense of a final clarification. She arrived wearing a tailored grey coat and an expression that suggested she already regretted the visit. Wolfe didn't mince words. "You delivered this letter." She blinked. He held up the printed page. "Your face is on the camera. Explain." She hesitated. "I wanted to test you." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Test me?" "I needed to know if you were still watching, still questioning, or if you were content with a neat answer." "I do not accept neat answers," Wolfe growled. Alicia exhaled. "Then I'll tell you the truth." We waited. She glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. Pilcher wasn't working alone. He had someone pass him the supplement compound. Not Calder, someone else. I found out 2 days after Rowan died. Pilcher had been communicating with Tobias Key. Wolfe's face was stone. "Proof?" She opened her purse and pulled out a printout of an email chain between Key and Pilcher. Oblique language, but clear enough once you knew what to look for. "He'll bring it to Wolfe. He won't suspect. Once it's in his system, we let it sit. No drama. Just results." Wolfe took it and read slowly. "I had no way of knowing if you'd accept this," she said. "So I sent the letter. If you didn't react, I'd go to the press. Why protect Pilcher at all? I wasn't. I was protecting myself. Pilcher's arrest meant the financial pressure on Key would grow. Key was circling. I needed to get ahead of it. I stood. So Case applied the poison? Yes, he's old money, old connections. He didn't need to be present, just useful." Wolfe sat back. "Then I will speak to Kramer." Alicia stood. "Am I free to go?" "You are," Wolfe said, "but do not underestimate the damage of a half-truth." She left quietly. Wolfe turned to me. "Quite on it. We had one more piece to place." By evening, Kramer had his team en route to Key's townhouse, and Wolfe, he allowed himself a second glass of beer with dinner. That, he said, was the final ripple. "So now it's done?" "Yes." "You sure?" He gave me a look. "Archie, never insult my digestion." It was Tuesday evening, the 1st, our true evening of peace, since Roderick Rowan had dropped dead mid-squab. The brownstone was quiet. The orchids were drinking their mist. Fritz was humming something old and German in the kitchen. And Wolfe, Nero Wolfe, was reading Montaigne in the office chair like he hadn't spent the past week watching human motives unravel in his dining room. The case was, in the only way that mattered to Wolfe, finally and fully closed. Kramer had picked up Tobias Key that morning. Turns out Alicia was telling the truth, or just enough of it. The emails she'd uncovered, carefully parsed, cautiously phrased, had been verified, their metadata traced. Pilcher hadn't acted alone. Key had acquired the compound through a client of his, an herbalist in Westchester, the kind who dabbled in legally grey tinctures for desperate hedge funders with back pain. He passed the extract to Pilcher under the guise of enhanced cellular oxygenation. The phrase looked good on a bottle, and lethal in a stomach. With both conspirators in custody, Kramer had grunted his approval, though he took Wolfe's explanation like he always did. A pill he knew he had to swallow, but would chew bitterly anyway. Justice, for Wolfe, was never about applause. It was about accuracy, and that's where we were now, the calm after the calculation. I was sitting in the office with a whiskey in one hand and a copy of the Gazette in the other. The headline read, "Rowan Murder. Tech founder and financier charged in poisoning plot brownstone. Dinner proves fatal in high stakes." Scheme Wolfe scowled at the headline, as if it had personally offended his syntax. Brownstone dinner proves fatal. Foy, I smiled. You prefer something with more restraint? I prefer truth. The dinner did not prove fatal. Rowan proved fatal. To himself. Not quite the tagline they want. No, and they should be flogged. I set the paper down and leaned back. You ever get tired of being right? No, Wolfe said. Only of being proven right slowly. I laughed and sipped my drink. Wolfe closed Montaigne, set it aside, and looked at me, not with irritation, but with the faint trace of thought he usually reserves for rare orchids and perfectly aged cheese. You've had questions? Sure, I said. Still do. Ask. I swirled the glass. Why not tell Kramer everything at once? The supplement, the dinner, the suspicion of Key. You could have handed it to him on a silver platter. Because Kramer doesn't eat from silver platters, Wolfe replied. He eats from file folders and confessions. He needs process to accept truth, just as Rowan needed control. And you? I need certainty and structure. I nodded. That made sense. Wolfe didn't mind if people lied, as long as they did it consistently. He'd take a well-structured deception over a clumsy truth any day, as long as he could diagram it. What about Alicia? What about her? She walked the knife's edge the whole time. She could have warned Rowan. She could have stopped it. Wolfe gave a slight shrug. And yet she didn't. That is the flaw of grief delayed by resentment. She wanted him to suffer, not to die. She might get the trust back now. She will. But she will never feel safe in it. There was silence for a while, thick and oddly satisfying. Then Wolfe spoke again, quieter this time. Do you know what disturbed me most, Archie? That someone used your dining room as a crime scene? No, he said. That Rowan chose it, deliberately, not to implicate me, but to exempt himself from doubt. He believed this space, this order, would protect him. He was wrong. You take that personally? I take the illusion personally, Wolfe said. He used my sanctuary as armor. That is unacceptable, not because he died here, but because he presumed he could offload his paranoia into my structure. I whistled softly. He believed in the wrong thing. No, Wolfe said. He believed in the right thing. But he believed for the wrong reason. That stopped me. I let the words hang in the air like incense. Wolfe finished his beer, slowly. Not rushed. Nothing ever rushed. I have seen men murdered in alleys, kitchens, penthouses, theaters, but this was something else. A performance of self-preservation that turned into suicide by confidence. You think he knew? Wolfe considered it. No, but he suspected, and instead of confronting that suspicion, he surrendered to comfort. That is the fatal act. I stood and poured myself a second drink. And you, Wolfe? You ever tempted to surrender to comfort? He closed his eyes. I already have. Look around you. I smiled. But you control the terms. He didn't open his eyes. That is the difference. Just then, Fritz appeared in the doorway. Dinner is ready. Trout with lemon butter and those wild greens you liked. Wolfe rose. Thank you, Fritz. We walked into the dining room, and for the first time in over a week it felt clean again. Not scrubbed, restored. The table had no ghosts, the chairs no secrets, only plates, polished silver, and a meal prepared by hands we trusted. We sat. Fritz served, and Wolfe lifted his fork with ceremonial calm. This, he said, is what civility tastes like. Trout? Continuity, he corrected. We ate. No one died, and that in this house counted as progress. After dinner, as I was filing away the last of the case notes, I found a small envelope tucked in the back of my drawer. Handwritten, addressed. To me inside a single card, Mr. Goodwin. He trusted Wolfe. But you watched everyone. Keep watching. You're not just the legs. You're the conscience. A no-return address. No fingerprints. I looked at the card for a long time, then placed it in the drawer beneath the memo that read, "The orchid room is not to be entered after 4 p.m. under pain of death." Wolfe had his rituals. I had mine. And the city. unpredictable, crowded, brutal and beautiful, kept spinning outside. Another day would come, another guest, another illusion to be dismantled. But for now, we had stillness. And in this house, stillness wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of control. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "Archie," he said, "turn off the light." And I did. You'd think a solved murder and a double arrest would clear the air. But in Wolfe's world, resolution isn't a moment, it's a condition. And until he declares it, the matter lingers like an unfinished sentence. It was late Wednesday when that moment finally came. The day had been uneventful. No doorbells, no police, no weeping relatives or confessions delivered with shaking hands. Just the return of silence, deliberate, dense and heavily earned. Dinner had been roast guinea hen, courtesy of Fritz, served with watercress and a glass of the Alsatian Riesling Wolf Hordes, like it's a family heirloom. We ate without speaking much, and that alone told me the case was still under review in Wolfe's cranium. When the plates were cleared and the napkins folded, we returned to the office. Wolfe poured himself a glass of cognac, eased into the red chair like it owed him interest, and finally said it. "It is finished." I leaned back. No footnotes, no postscript, no moral punctuation mark. Wolfe sipped, then nodded. "Oh, there is a moral. Several. But they are for contemplation, not publication." That, coming from Wolfe, was practically a toast. I stretched. Out in the client chair. "So, for the record, Pilcher delivers the poison, Key supplies it, Alicia suspects, baits you with the anonymous letter. You reel in the rest." Wolfe closed his eyes, satisfied. "A man who engineers death through supplementation is no less guilty than one who uses a knife. The instrument is irrelevant. The intention is the crime. And Key. He saw a window. Pilcher's ambition, Alicia's resentment, Rowan's paranoia. Key offered a spark, then stepped back. He believed distance would absolve him. And it nearly did. Phooey. It merely delayed consequence." I nodded. "What I still don't get is Rowan himself. Why come here at all?" Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me. "You do understand, you said it yourself." I frowned. "I did?" "Yes. He believed in this house, in my table, in our routine. Not because they were safe, but because they were unchangeable. In a world unraveling at the seams, he chose the one place he couldn't manipulate. So he thought it was safe. No, Archie, Wolfe said. He knew it was true. That was his mistake. He believed truth would protect him. I let that one sit. Wolfe continued, softer now. What Rowan wanted wasn't sanctuary. It was a mirror that refused to lie, and that in the end killed him. Not the poison, the illusion. That was Wolfe in a nutshell. Strip away the scandal. The screams, the suspects, and what you're left with is one man sitting in a chair, diagnosing the fatal flaw of human belief. I took out the last envelope from my desk drawer. The one Alicia had slipped me before she left the city. It wasn't dramatic, just a photo. Rowan, 10 years younger, standing on a rooftop with Alicia beside him, his arm around her shoulders, her face lit with something that might have been trust. The kind of picture people keep long after they forget why it mattered. I handed it to Wolfe. He glanced, nodded once, and slid it into a drawer without a word. I stood and stretched. So what now? Now, Wolfe said, we return to routine. And the next case? When it comes, he said, not before. I walked to the light switch. The brownstone was quiet. The ghosts were gone. The rooms were ours again, untouched, waiting, immaculate. I turned off the light.